The first thing people always noticed about Eleanor was her beauty. Golden hair that caught the light like fire. Eyes so green they seemed stolen from spring itself. Skin pale and soft like porcelain. She carried it all without effort, like someone born to be adored. But inside her own home, that beauty was the very reason she was hated. Her mother would not look at her for long. Her father's voice turned sharp whenever she entered the room. Her brothers mocked her behind her back, and her sisters rolled their eyes whenever she spoke. At dinner, no one passed her the bread unless she asked twice. At night, she heard whispers and laughter in the hall, about her, always about her. It hadn't always been this way. As a child, she remembered being held, kissed on the forehead, praised for her drawings. But as she grew older, as her face began to shine in ways no one else's did, something changed. Love turned into silence. Warmth turned into resentment. The neighbors adored her. At church, women whispered to their husbands to look away, while men smiled too long at her. Shopkeepers gave her apples for free. Strangers told her she looked like she belonged on a stage or in a portrait. But at home, her home, she belonged nowhere. By 16, Eleanor had learned to move quietly, to shrink her laughter, to swallow her tears. Her mother only spoke to her for chores. Her father avoided her eyes. Her siblings treated her as though her very presence was a stain. One evening, she overheard her mother's bitter whisper. She was born to break this family. Mark my words. That night, Eleanor stood at her window, staring into the dark fields beyond the farm. Her hands trembled on the sill, her chest heavy with a loneliness no one her age should have to bear. And in the quiet, she made herself a promise. If they will not love me here, then I will find love somewhere else. Even if it means leaving everything behind. What Eleanor didn't know was that the promise she made that night would change her life forever. The mornings in that house were always the same. The sound of dishes clattering, voices calling for breakfast, laughter filling every corner except hers. She would quietly step out of her small room, her hair unbrushed, her dress simple, and take her place at the end of the table. No one greeted her. No one even noticed she was there. Her father's voice carried across the room, warm when he spoke to his sons, sharp when his eyes accidentally landed on her. Her mother hardly looked at her at all, except when it was to point out something she had done wrong. Even her younger siblings had learned to ignore her presence, treating her like a shadow that didn't belong. She had grown used to the silence that wrapped around her like a cloak, but inside she burned. She burned with questions she never dared to ask. Why do they hate me? Why do they look at me like I'm something they wish had never been born? Sometimes, when she caught her reflection in the glass of the window, she almost startled herself. She was beautiful, striking in a way that was impossible to hide. Her golden hair, her bright eyes, her delicate features, these were the very things her family despised. Because where they blended into the earth with ordinary faces, she shone like a flame, and they could not forgive her for it. That morning, as she stood to clear the plates, her father's voice cut through the air. Don't touch that. You'll break it, like you break everything else. The girl froze, her hands trembling. She wanted to scream, to ask him why he spoke to her that way when all she ever did was try. But instead, she lowered her head, gathered the courage she always carried in silence, and walked away. She would not cry, not yet. Not where they could see. That night, the house was alive with noise. Her brothers laughed in the main room. Her mother hummed while folding clothes. Her father smoked his pipe on the porch. From outside, anyone passing by would think this was a happy family. And maybe it was, just not for her. She sat alone in her room, staring at the single candle flickering on the wooden table. Shadows played across the walls, stretching and bending. Just like her life, twisted, stretched, and bent out of shape by people who were supposed to love her. Sometimes she wondered if she had been adopted. Sometimes she wondered if she was cursed. No daughter should feel like a stranger in her own home. When she closed her eyes, she could still hear her mother's voice from earlier that evening. You should be grateful we let you stay here. No one else would. The words cut deeper than any knife. Let me stay here? It was her home too, wasn't it? Her blood ran in the same veins as theirs. And yet they spoke of her like she was an intruder. She curled up on the small bed, pulling the thin blanket tight around her. Through the cracked window, the moonlight spilled across the floor. It was the only gentle thing in her life, that silver light, soft and constant. She whispered into the night, words no one else would ever hear. "One day I'll leave this place. One day they'll see me for who I really am." The horse tied in the yard gave a restless whinny, as if it had heard her vow. The wind pressed against the window pane, carrying secrets from the forest beyond. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to shift. The world outside those walls had been waiting for her. And soon she would be forced to step into it. For now, though, she only closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks, quiet and hidden, like everything else about her. The morning came cold and sharp. She was the first to rise, as always. The chores were hers, though no one ever thanked her for them. She carried water from the well, her fingers stinging in the chill, then swept the porch before the sun had fully climbed over the ridge. Her father passed her on his way out to the fields. He didn't speak. He never did. Sometimes she thought silence was easier than the bitterness she usually got from the others. Inside, her mother scolded her for letting ash settle on the stove. One of her brothers pushed past her so hard she nearly stumbled into the wall. No one noticed. No one cared. But that day something was different. When she stepped outside to hang the washing, a stranger rode into the yard. His horse was tall, its coat shining in the pale sunlight. He was not from their town. She could tell by the cut of his jacket, the quiet authority and the way he held the reins. He looked around, his eyes sharp until they fell on her. For a moment she froze with the sheet still in her hands. No man had ever looked at her like that, not with pity, not with anger, but with recognition. Like he saw her, truly saw her, and understood what no one else had ever tried to. Her mother came rushing out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone suddenly sweet, the kind she never used at home. The stranger nodded politely. "I'm just passing through," he said. "But I need water for my horse." Her mother pointed toward the well, but the stranger's eyes stayed on the girl. "You live here?" he asked her directly. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say no. She wanted to say this house is no home at all. But all she managed was a small nod. Something flickered in his expression, something she couldn't name. He looked at her as though he could see every bruise that wasn't on her skin, every scar she carried in silence. And in that instant, for the first time in her life, she felt a strange spark, hope. She didn't know his name or why he looked at her that way, but something deep in her chest whispered that his arrival wasn't chance. It was the beginning of something that might finally break her chains. The stranger dismounted slowly, his boots stirring dust as he led his horse toward the well. She followed at a distance, carrying a bucket, though he hadn't asked her to. Her fingers trembled, not from the weight, but from the way her family's eyes followed her. Her mother's voice cut sharp behind her. "Don't just stand there. Be quick about it." She lowered her gaze, but the stranger noticed. He noticed everything. The way she flinched. The way her shoulders curled in on themselves. The way her hands never stopped moving. As if stillness itself would bring punishment. When she drew water, he took the bucket from her before she could lift it. His hands brushed hers, rough from travel but steady. "Thank you," he said softly. Words no one had ever spoken to her for such a small task. Her chest tightened. She wanted to hold on to that moment, to tuck it away where no one could take it. Her brothers lingered nearby, whispering, laughing at her as they always did. But when the stranger glanced their way, they fell silent. There was something in his gaze that warned them, something they weren't brave enough to challenge. The girl turned back to hang the washing, but her thoughts spun too fast. Why was he here? Why had he looked at her like that? Later, when the sun dropped low, she found him again near the fence. He had watered his horse and was tightening the saddle. She thought he was leaving. A hollow ache rose in her chest, though she didn't understand why. Before she could walk past, his voice stopped her. "You're not happy here, are you?" Her heart pounded. No one had ever asked her that. Not once. She couldn't answer. Not with her family so close. But the stranger's eyes softened, as if he already knew. "Sometimes," he said gently, "the world tries to convince us we're worth nothing. But I've learned this. Those who are treated the worst often carry the strongest light." Her lips parted, but no words came. He was already mounting his horse, ready to ride into the twilight. Yet before he left, he leaned down just enough so only she could hear. "If you ever need a way out," he whispered, "look for me on the road south. I'll be waiting." And then he was gone, his horse's hooves fading into the dusk. She stood there long after, the wind tugging at her hair, her heart a storm of fear and longing. For the first time, she dared to believe there might be a life beyond those walls, if only she had the courage to take it. The house grew colder with each passing day, not because of the weather, but because of the way her family treated her. Their eyes carried disgust, their words cut deeper than knives. She ate alone, she worked alone, and even when she breathed, it felt like a crime in their eyes. But still her beauty shone like a quiet flame. They could never smother. And maybe that was why they hated her even more. One evening, when the world outside was turning, golden under the setting sun, she overheard them, whispering plans. Plans to send her away, to erase her from their lives completely. Her hands trembled. Her chest tightened. They didn't want her, not even as a shadow in their house. Tears blurred her vision, but then she remembered the stranger, the one who had seen her worth when her own blood had denied it. Maybe life was offering her a path she had been too afraid to walk. That night, as the house slept, she stood by the doorway, the moonlight soft against her face. Behind her were years of rejection, cruelty, and pain. Ahead of her was uncertainty, but also hope. When she stepped outside, she saw him waiting, not too close, not too far, just enough to let her know she still had a choice. Her family's voices called from inside, sharp and angry, but for once they didn't hold her back. Her breath shook as she walked forward. Each step was heavier than the last, yet filled with a strength she never knew she had. The stranger reached out his hand, not demanding, just offering, and she took it. The night echoed with her family's fury, but their power was gone. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't broken, she was free. As they walked away together under the silent stars, she knew her story wasn't ending. It was only beginning. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe. And join us for more powerful and emotional stories that stay with you long after they end.